going to start. Hi, everyone. I hope you're okay and you're enjoying the Creative Futures Writers' Day. It's been an incredible day so far. Thank you for all the speakers and panelists who have shared their insights with us. My name's Salma Begum. I'm a trustee here at Creative Future and a literary agent at Greyhound Literary. I'm thrilled to welcome you to our next panel, Meet the Agents, where we'll dive into the world of literary agents and explore the crucial support they offer authors beyond simply selling books. Before we begin, I'd like to tell you a little bit more about Creative Future. As an arts organisation and charity, we're dedicated to supporting talented creatives who face barriers to creative opportunities. Since our founding in 2007, Creative Future has supported over 6,000 underrepresented creatives, delivered more than 400 courses, held 80 events, and published over 30 books and guides. Today, we're excited to bring together three remarkable agents who'll share their insights on building lasting author-agent relationships, developing stories for today's market, and establishing sustainable writing careers. Let me introduce them briefly. So first, we have Clara Foster from Aevitas Creative Management. Clara seeks adult fiction, YA, and selection non-fiction with strong voice-led narratives, and loves accessible literary and upmarket fiction, particularly fantasy, historical, and speculative works that combine beautiful prose with high-stake plots. Next, we have Kerry-Ann Bentley from the Good Literary Agency. Kerry-Ann represents adult literary and commercial fiction, narrative non-fiction, and some children's literature. She's especially drawn to themes of identity, race, and family, often rooted in the Caribbean and diaspora experience. And finally, we have Bruno Onuki Reynell from New River Literary. Bruno focuses on cross-cultural, global-minded works that bring fresh perspectives from East Asia, and he's passionate about helping authors share these stories with the world. So thank you, and please give a hand for the wonderful agents. Today's discussion will focus on three main areas. So one will be understanding the role of a literary agent. We'll explore what agents do beyond just selling books and dive into what they look for in both manuscripts and in authors themselves. And then we'll focus on market trends and shaping stories for success. So our panelists will talk about today's market trends and the unique challenges in different genres, how they collaborate with authors to develop stories that resonate. And then finally, we'll look at pitching, networking, and practical advice. They'll share strategies for pitching, tips for breaking into the publishing industry, and advice on building a lasting career in publishing. And then we'll wrap up with a brief Q&A, so feel free to jot down any questions you may have, and for now, we'll just dive in. So I will start with my first question. So many authors see agents mainly as people who sell their books. Could each of you share a broader view of your role and responsibilities? Clara, could we start with you?
Yeah, of course. Can you all hear me properly? I'm not sure. I'm never sure about the mic. Good? Perfect. Excellent. What do we do beyond selling books? The answer is sort of everything. I think the agent-author relationship is a really, really important one. I would say that. I'm an agent. But we are your first point of call. We are your touchstone between everything you do and the publishing world, and we're here to provide you with advice and help you plan your careers. And it really means that even if you change publishing house, editors leave, houses change, hopefully, if you get your relationship right with the agent, that's something that could span years, even decades, and your agent becomes your point of continuity. So I work very editorially, so that's the first thing I do with my clients. We also have a discussion about what we want next, how we're going to plan. And then, of course, selling, there's the contracts as well, making sure that your interests are protected. Have I missed anything?
Just advocacy.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I think that's what I've got, but I will leave you to speak a little bit more about that.
Thank you. Adding on to Clara's fantastic answers, I think of my agenting career, especially as it pertains to the relationship, as mainly being my author's cheerleader, their advocate. The publishing industry can be very scary for writers, and their books is their baby, their soul, and you want to be like their gladiator, protecting their interest, using your knowledge and basically using your expertise to do as much of the nitty-gritty so that the author can just remain the artist and create.
Thank you. And Bruno, just if you have anything to add, and just another question that I'd ask you is, what's one part of your job that you do that isn't visible, but is something you'd like aspiring authors to be aware of?
Yeah, I think with the first question, kind of echo everything that you say, and you're someone that the author can build a relationship with over hopefully quite a long time, and protect your interests over that whole period of time, as opposed to one single one-off occasion where you might hopefully sell one of their books. And then maybe tying into the second question, I think another thing is you mentioned expertise, but it's your job to really know the market and know who you're selling to. So maybe one sort of hidden area is all the time we spend talking to the editors, who are the ones who we are trying to sell the books to, and I suppose us developing our understanding of the market and how that might apply to the books that we're representing. So yeah, I think all the sort of networking / coffees and whatever it is, that we spend quite a lot of our time devoted to building these relationships with the people we sell to.
I think that's really interesting. Sorry, I'm just going to add on to that, because my MD always says that agents are essentially free consultants until the commission comes due. So, for that period of time where actually it sort of sometimes looks to people like, what are you doing? We are adding value in terms of knowledge. So I think that's a really interesting point to make.
And I think I'd also kind of add to your answers that actually not only do we think about the rights of the book, the copyright when we're selling into a publisher, but there's also quite a lot that we do when we're thinking about translation, but also having those conversations with film and TV agents who may work within the team or might belong to another agency. So there's a lot of cross-industry collaboration that happens too. Is there anything that you'd like to add on to that? If there's any kind of rights that you handle that are perhaps not immediate?
I think those are the big ones. English language rights, foreign rights, film and TV. There are other adaptations. You do get dramatic rights for stage and screen and video games, but those are less usual, I think. But actually, I guess that's when the expertise comes in, because it's up to us, if that becomes a thing, to find the right experts to then help that function.
And I think quite important, just because all of those things that you mentioned, it's not something that's obvious from the outside, and it can seem a bit cloak and dagger from the writer's point of view. So yeah, I think sort of trying to help the author through things like that.
I think that's something that surprised me the most, that when you are working with an agent, and as an agent myself, you're really thinking about the author's book, but not just that. So you are thinking about all these other opportunities, and you're thinking long term, because some of these moments might not come for a very long time. It might be that 10 years down the line, that a film and TV opportunity presents itself, or a book may take off in one translation market, and that might have an effect on many others. And actually, I think that's always quite an interesting discussion that I then end up having with my writers, and it's not necessarily the one that I think they expect to have. So thank you. My next question is about agent-author relationships. So what qualities do you look for in an author-agent relationship? Carrie-Anne, can I go to you?
Sure. When considering taking on a client, an author, obviously, the first instance, I would love and appreciate their work an enormous amount. You want to devote an enormous amount of time, as you say, for free, until the commission comes in. So genuinely loving that author's voice, their work, makes it very easy to have a copacetic relationship. Also, I'm looking for a author who is knowledgeable about the industry, about what it means to be a writer. Even though I'm not expecting them to come to know everything, that's why they need an agent. But to have a sense of what an agent does and what an agent does not do. Sometimes authors think that literary agents operate in the same way as a talent agent or a speaking agency, and that's not the case. And on the agent side, there's a lot of mitigating expectations for the author, and I think the best way to make that relationship work well is just a lot of transparency, a lot of communication, setting out the terms, the boundaries of how that communication takes place. Each agent has different levels of, accessibility to their writers. So again, setting out how you work, how you want your author to work, and obviously meeting their needs as well. So lots of conversations about communicating. It's a very communicating, person-facing job. Yeah.
Thank you. Bruno, how do you manage this with writers who are not probably in the territory that you're predominantly selling into?
Yeah, I think in a sense we're quite lucky at our agency where we sort of largely take books that have been published already in Japan or Korea and sell the rights into the UK or wherever it might be. We're quite lucky in the sense that they've already had probably some measure of success in their home territory. But then when we're considering new books by new authors, I think sort of if you hear a little bit about the author's personality and whether they're the kind of person who will be easy to work with in some way, it can really make a big difference as to whether, when we make that decision of whether to handle a book or not. And I think probably quite similar with both of you or three of you primary agents where, I suppose the worst situation you can probably get in is if you have this author and you're dreading whenever you have to contact them, or they might be dreading having to get into contact with you for whatever reason. So I guess avoiding situations like that on a basic personality level.
Yeah, communication is so important. I think that's what's coming through. Clara, do you have anything?
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting question, and I think Carrie-Anne gave a really interesting and an insightful answer, but it's another primary agent, it's really interesting for me because I think it's a good reminder that all agents work very, very, we have some things that stay the same, but for the most part, we all work very, very differently. I really only have, beyond obviously loving someone's work, 2 criteria for what I think makes a great author-agent relationship. One is, I always say, first and foremost, I work in partnership. I don't work for you, you don't work for me. We work together and we plan. What is the other one? I'm sitting here in front of all of you and I'm going, and the other is that I want to work with writers who want to make a career out of their writing. It's a lot of time investment. And if I love someone's work and they go, but actually, this is the only book I want to do, I'm going, actually, is that worth me really investing my soul into it, which is what you do with work that you love. And then I only have one rule, which I think is a pretty good rule for all of life, which is don't be a dick. Yeah, that's pretty much it. I
Works
don't
both ways.
Yeah, it really does, and I don't really, expect anything else or want anything else. I don't really need my authors to know anything about the market beyond, if I go, look, I think this sits in YA, and your author's going, what is YA? I'm like, okay, maybe you should have done a little bit of research, but actually, for the most part, it is partnership and career, and that's it for me.
It's so interesting hearing you say that about if an author is only focusing on one book, because on the literary end, there are sometimes authors that I work with who I know it's taken about 15 years for them to write this one book. And so much of it is also, I think, I still want them to continue writing and know that potentially it might be another 15 years until their next book is ready. So it's not necessarily even saying that it's about, having something that you're churning out. It's thinking thoughtfully and carefully about a long, sustainable career. And really how we can get the author there. And of course, there's so much else around it. So as we've kind of mentioned in terms of you've got a book, but what are all the other ways that we can reach readers. So are you going to be up for doing events and speaking at literary festivals, or is there another way in which you may find your readers? I work with some graphic novelists and comic artists, so it's very different because they go to a lot of fairs. It's much smaller scale and quite different to the literary festival, sitting here and kind of hearing them speak on a panel. But it's just that kind of connection and really the professionalization and taking yourself and your work really seriously, because that's what we do to East Asian voices. Could you discuss the unique challenges and benefits of representing these types of works? Bruno, if I could start with you.
Yeah, so in terms of books from or relating to East Asia, I think we're very, very lucky at the moment. In terms of trends, there's sort of a huge market or growing market and interest in, on the one hand, you've had literary books from East Asia, which have always, Murakami or Han Kang or whoever it might be, who have always done very well. But then you've also got this huge growing area of commercial upmarket. I'm sure you've seen them, sort of books to do with cats and bookshops and coffee and things like that. So in that sense, that's enough books have come out which have been big successes, which have led the way, and I think really convinced editors who, maybe 2 years ago, there might be an editor who you think, oh, there's no way they'll be interested in a book like this, but then suddenly you find editors who really broadening their interests and things like that. So yeah, we're very lucky at the moment in terms of interest in stories from Korea, Japan.
What do you think that, can you see what a new trend in that area might be? Is that kind of emerging, or is it still quite a lot of kind of focus on that magical aspect, like that we've got with Before the Coffee Gets Cold and
and I think this is the kind of thing we really learn when we're talking to the editors, and some of them might have bought a couple of books like these, and there's a feeling of sort of saturation, and then they're looking for the next thing, which is other genres to explore. Perhaps can't quite put a finger on it at the moment, but things like whether it's genre fiction or some kind of non-fiction that also taps into similar themes or tropes that have been doing really, really well in fiction. So I think across the board, you get these really imaginative editors or sort of slightly pioneering editors who are, at the forefront of looking for what's the next thing that's going to do really well from East Asia. So maybe across a variety of genres. They're quite open-minded, I suppose is the answer.
Yeah, and I mean, genre is also having a moment, I guess, that kind of, the way that we talk about it in the industry is kind of, well, how would you actually kind of speak about genre currently with things like romantasy? I'm sure you've had, well, I don't know if you've had that term or if it's just something that we make up in the office.
Yeah, it's a really funny one, actually. I should say from the off that I do love genre fiction. I work a lot in genre fiction. I'm actually a real generalist. So I work across non-fiction, adult fiction, from accessible literary to book club to genre. So that's fantasy, romantasy, historical. Genre also includes, though I don't do it, crime and thriller. And what have I missed? Procedurals, rom-coms, that kind of thing. And I work in YA, and I've currently, for some reason, unexpectedly got my hands full with a picture book. So there are a lot of agents who aren't as crazy as me and do, find a niche. But I, as an agent, and this does feed into the question that you asked, want to work with writers whose work I always say, if I can see myself putting money down for that book in a bookshop, I want to work with you as your agent. And because as a reader, I have such wide tastes, I figure it makes sense for me to work that way as an agent as well. And that follows into trends, I think, because readers are swayed by trends. If there's something everyone's talking about, the general public will absolutely by it, but things change, they move. And I think publishing gets very caught up sometimes in what's the next big thing. We don't know how we're going to find this. This has sold really well, so we've got all these comp titles. And the first thing I always say to any of my authors is absolutely under no circumstances are you to write to trend. Because by the time you've written the book and maybe even, you know, got it published, that's 2 years, 3 years down the line, the trend's moved on. The only thing I think anyone should be writing is the thing that they want to write. It's my job, obviously, as the agent, to keep an eye on the trends, to know what's happening, which means that if, you know, one of my authors comes up with something and I go, oh my God, you are right on the money, right what all the editors are looking for right now, I can position it in a certain way, but that's just selling. That's not the book itself. And so I think the first thing is absolutely do not, under any circumstances, try and write to trend, because it will not feel as authentic as something that you've just written because you think it's brilliant and you love it and it's the book you want to write. But on the other hand, just to go back to what you were saying, yes, genre is having a moment, and I think that's something else that happens. Things come round, they come round in circles. So at the moment, everyone wants to read and find romantasy, fantasy with that is a romance at its heart. Fantasy itself is having a real time, I think, in large part due to the nature of escapism, but also the rise of, you know, book subscription boxes, Illumicrate and Fairy Loot and any of the others. But those things were always there. You know, I grew up reading what we would now call romantasy. It just wasn't called romantasy at the time. So I was thrilled when it got a name. But what happens is with a trend, something gets big, and then all of a sudden everything under the sun is now called romantasy, even if I'm looking at it as a long-time reader and going, that's not actually romantasy. So I think it's publishing shoehorns things into boxes in order to try and work out how to sell it. But writers will write, and writers always write in the same, I don't think that's a bad thing, not in an unoriginal way, in the same circle. Sorry, I am yapping on, feel free to stop me at any time. Writers will always write what they want to write, and the things that interest human beings will always be the same. And I think it's just a matter of levels of attention going up and down. But actually the market doesn't change as much as we think it does. And at the minute, everyone's going, oh, middle grade's not selling, YA is doing really well. About 10 years ago, everyone was going, oh, YA is never coming back. It'll come back, middle grade will come back. That's how the industry works. So I think my one piece of advice is just write what you want to write, don't write to trend.
And I also think it's quite fascinating how you can't really just focus on trends in publishing either, because we don't live in a vacuum. So
Exactly.
There's always, I think the advice I give to the writers I work with is to be aware of what's going on around you and what people are interested in, what are people talking about in the news, in film, in music, and what are those things that interest you and perhaps that your work may speak to, just to know where you want your work to sit in the wider world, actually, because we write to be read. So, yeah.
And as you say, things shift. Rom-com is not a book genre. It is a film genre, and publishing has appropriated it.
Yeah.
Not, I should say, I think, particularly well, but we have. And so things are, as you say, really malleable, and they do shift.
And there can also be like a danger to the conversations around trends, and I'm thinking particularly, Kerry-Ann, around the representation of Black voices, and especially after, during the pandemic and during Black Lives Matter movement the last few years, and how that's kind of perhaps had an impact on how we then think about publishing. Is that something you could speak to?
Yeah, thanks for that great question. So yes, my focus is on diasporic voices, the African diaspora specifically, which includes the Caribbean. I am Caribbean, and the way I'm cultivating my list, it's not necessarily like Clara. I am a generalist, and I'm interested in the identities of the writers, and so the challenge is, when you are dealing with Black and brown voices in an industry that has a status quo that is white, male, middle class, is that first it's a challenge to find representation for those voices to even be of interest to what editors think readers want to read, want to buy. And I think one of the biggest struggles is the fact that you can't have more than one at the same time. And during the pandemic, the advent of the pandemic, in which borders opened up in terms of remote work, but also in terms of the stories were being told, everyone was paying attention, and I think everyone noticed the huge influx of diverse stories and diverse voices. And conversations having now with other peers is that interest, that earnest drive for change has rapidly regressed. And the conversations I'm having is that I don't think that regression is intentional or malicious. You have to look at the society we're in, specifically of late, the economy after COVID, the wars that are happening, what is happening politically. It's not surprising that there has been this kind of counter to the influx of different voices that was happening. And so what continues to be a challenge for an agent who's representing these voices, who are underrepresented, and I'm trying to make them as represented as everyone else is, and not pigeonhole them into not everyone has to be a Toni Morrison, a Chimamanda. There's so many contemporary writers who, like Bolu Babalola, who's going off into rom-com. We have speculative writers of these diasporic identities. And what's difficult is seeing that vision and getting the publishing industry to recognize that there is potential there, because they're very risk averse, and what they've seen work before is what they want to see work again, even if the thing that worked before, they weren't expecting it. But even still, they try to make it as formulaic. And so when, especially now that there is more diversity, particularly I'm really concerned with the pigeonholing of what a writer of color, a Jamaican, a Nigerian, a Ugandan doesn't have to write what the other Nigerian, Jamaican, Ugandan writer that was successful before them. They don't have to be the same. I'm trying to navigate opening of what people are interested in and buying, so that there can be real representation that stays.
Thank you. It wasn't an easy question, so
Thank
you for answering. The next section that we're going to look at is pitching, networking, and practical advice for aspiring authors. So my first question is, when pitching books to publishers, what are some of the strategies you use to advocate for your clients? And particularly, how important is it for a manuscript to be pitchable? And what makes a pitch successful? So I'm sure authors in the room, that you've heard that you have to have this kind of elevator pitch or this one-line summary of your book. So it'd be really helpful to know, how does that actually play into your work as an agent when you're going out and talking to publishers? And actually, what is the submission process like? I found now when I'm working with authors and I'm saying, oh, and now we're getting ready to submit this to editors, they're like, okay, what does that actually involve? And then when I speak through it and I say, actually, this is what happens, this is how long it's going to take, there's quite a lot of surprise there. So if I could go to you, Clara.
I was really hoping you would come to me first. Okay, so the parts of that question that you just asked are, what makes a good pitch?
Yes.
And how does the pitchable nature of a novel come into the work that we do? That is the eternal question. And I think what I actually would like all of you guys to know is that as agents, we are also pitching on a daily basis, and we find it just as difficult as you do. I was on a call with an editor on Friday who I'd never met before. She's American. I sell directly into the States. And I pitched her a book that is not ready yet, that I'm hoping will be ready in January. And it's when I signed this woman on a partial draft, which, by the way, for fiction as agents, we never do. Don't ever submit your work to somebody on a partial. This is very unusual, but it means that I've had this book in my roster and I've been thinking about it for months and months and months, nearly a year now, which means that I've got to know the story really, really well. And I've pitched it to a couple of people and they've all really liked the sound of it and all really wanted to see more when it's ready. And the other day I was on this call with this editor and I told her, and at the end she went, "Oh my God, I've got big goosebumps. Are you a writer? How did you pitch that well?" And I was going, yes! But I think the reason I pitched so well is because I have sat with this book for so long and I love it so much. And pitching well comes from practice. You know, the best way to think about a pitch actually is when I speak to my writers and other writers, I say, think about it somewhere between the blurb on the back of a book and a film trailer. You want to set up the stakes, so that means the tension and what might go wrong and the atmosphere, and you want to set up the characters and give us a flavour of what the emotional arc is going to look like, but you don't want to be too synoptic. You don't want to give us the full story. And when you're pitching, it really depends what the situation is as to how much you give. So when I am talking to editors maybe, the first thing I'll say, last year I sat here with Amy Baxter, who is a fabulous editor. She's now moved to Avon. And she said, I was sitting in a meeting and I got a submission from an agent and the subject line was just it was a pitch, but it was like 4 words, 3 words. It just said, magical bisexual Bridgerton. And she said, and I decided that I needed to buy that book right then and there. So it really depends what the situation is as to how the pitch is going to go. When you're talking to someone in person, you want an elevator pitch. You want 2 sentences max to tell them about your book, especially if you happen to be talking to an agent and we've not got a lot of time. We're real magpies. You've got to keep our attention because everyone wants to pitch all the time and I'm busy going, I'm so tired, my brain is so full, please. But if you give me something that I can latch onto, I'm going to go, okay, I really love that. So when you're speaking to someone in person, keep it short. When you're sending a query letter, you want the full sort of blurb, make it longer. And then when we pitch, I don't really think about, how pitchable a book is. Again, much like with trends, I'm only concerned with, do I love it? Do I want to read the book? But it does then become my job to work out what agents are looking for, to see if I can position it in a way that suits the market. And then I go around pitching all the time. But I often say to my authors, you don't worry about that, I'll worry about that. So I think for now, for you guys, don't even worry about the market that much. Just get to know your own book and know how to talk about it and know how to get across what you love about it, because the more enthusiasm you have and the more you love something like that, the better it'll be. I haven't answered the second part of your question.
No, that's okay.
I'll leave that for somebody else.
Bruno, I was just thinking about the fact that you will be coming... the book will have been through that pitch process before it comes to you, and there will have been another agent perhaps involved in working that up. What do you then do in terms of taking that pitch to the UK market?
Yeah, so I think sort of obviously trends and tastes and things like that are incredibly different, for example, in Japan compared to what it might be in the UK. And I think it's sort of, when you're considering the book, working out what parts of that book, why has it suddenly struck a chord with you, and how can you convert that into a pitch for UK editors that will really, get them interested. And I think speaking to editors, it's often, as simple as they see the title and it's a really intriguing title, so then they read the pitch and then they go, oh yeah, that sounds really good, and then they read the first 3 chapters, then it makes them want to read immediately the whole book. So yeah, I think it's just sort of working out why you've it can be instinctive in a way, and you've got to slightly try and unpick why it is that you've fallen for that book when you first read it, and how can you introduce it to editors in a way that it will really resonate. And I know Clara also talked about how it makes it so much easier when you've fallen in love with a book. And you know, through the nature of my work, there's been some times where I have to handle a book where I don't have strong feelings about it. And I think probably, you know, editors aren't stupid. They can probably tell that you don't have strong feelings about it. Whereas when you really, really, you know, when you really love a book that you're pitching to an editor, you feel like you can talk about it for hours. And that enthusiasm, I'm sure, comes across. And again, like you said, practice as well. We've just finished an event, a book fair in Frankfurt, where you do about, I don't know, 60 meetings in a week. And at the start of it, you know, I was pitching books, and afterwards I thought, oh my God, what am I doing? That was that was complete rubbish. But then towards the end, you really, you know, start to work out what it is that the editors are responding to in the pitch, and yeah, you gradually perfect it, I suppose. And that's part of the process of preparing your submission, and making sure what you how you present it is perfect by the time you're sending them the manuscript and the email.
The things that have kind of stayed with me from what you've both just said is the fact that what's helpful for you all to know and to think about when you're meeting with agents is actually how do they talk to you about your book? Because if that enthusiasm is coming through, and perhaps hopefully you're in a situation where you may have to make a decision between a few agents, that actually you really pay attention to the person who's really connected with your work, because that's the enthusiasm that they will be bringing to the editor meetings and beyond. The other thing, I guess, that kind of stuck out to me that I don't think we talk about that much is how much agents talk to each other, because we kind of have this a view that we're kind of very competitive, and perhaps that we don't, you know, we don't talk about our projects, but actually there is so much within colleagues anyway, within a company that you may work in, or someone who may share your tastes, that I may practice my pitch with my colleagues and really try and perfect that. Or someone who I know, they might not represent books in this area, but they love reading books in this area, so I'll go and speak to them. And that's actually something that I think all of you can do in this room too. Find your reader, your key reader, and try to practice that on them. Or someone who perhaps doesn't really have as much time and or isn't that interested in see what sparks their attention. Carrie-Anne, could you speak a little bit about like the kind of nitty-gritty of going out with a submission, like what that means, what actually you have to do as an agent to get that book in front of an editor?
Do you mean like the lead up to submission?
Yeah, and then like what is a submission, like the submission letter,
Yeah.
And then the follow-up, because I think actually, I think a lot of authors hear that a book has gone out and then they're waiting and they think, oh, maybe my agent's not doing anything because I'm not getting any updates, but actually there's a lot, I think.
Yeah, so when you're working with your author on the book, you'll be doing a round of edits, and eventually they'll come back with something that you're like, yes, this is the one. We can stop. Let's get this in front of editors. And at that stage, I give myself more work to do. I've got to prepare an editorial list, so a list of editors who I'm going to submit the book to, and that's got to be tailored. You can't just send it to absolutely everyone. Looking at divisions and imprints, the kind of books they typically buy and sell, and also specific. This is where your knowledge of your network comes in. What editors specifically, you can get really specific once you get to know an editor and have a coffee with them, what their tastes are about everything. And so that does a lot of work, because it's not like, please buy this. It's like, I know you want to buy this because I know you so well. And then, yeah, once you've got that list, then I'll start on the pitch letter, which is the sale letter, the covering letter. Authors have to do it for their books when they're querying to agents, and we do it to editors, and it'll be quite similar. And one thing that didn't come up when we were talking about pitching was comparative titles. I know everyone's going to be like, oh yeah. On the querying side, quickly, it's different for agents. I'm not too fussed about them, but it really is helpful for a lot of agents when you use comparative titles for your book, when you're querying to them, to let them know where you think your voice and the book itself sits in the market. It's also a good indication of the style, of the voice, or the inspiration. But on the business and publishing side, an editor, the publishers be like, okay, those 2 books, we'll run some numbers into a computer. How did they do well, sales-wise, marketing-wise, blah, blah, blah. And so I always do really great comparative titles, and that kind of, I always find, gets an editor's interest to what you're trying to do for your author when you're putting them on submission is get that editor to put that submission at the top of their pile so they can get back to you really quickly with hopefully an offer. But once you've got the pitch and the submission letter, you will then send it out to those editors, and then it's kind of out of our control. Then I'm back with the author and we're like, now we wait. And hopefully you would have done a really great job and you'll get amazing responses and an offer and an auction, all of that. But in case it doesn't happen like that, and it usually doesn't, lots of authors want to know, so how long will this take? And I can never give an answer because it varies depending on the books, and lots of editors go on holiday all the time. That can really slow down processes. This year in particular, it's been very slow. There's been just lots of disruption. The news, we're all surviving crazy, unprecedented time, and that does interfere with work. Everyone has personal lives, and publishing is just the type of industry where the person, if they're not in office, it does make a difference. And yeah, it can take a number of weeks, it can take months, even a year or more than a year for a book to sell. So much about publishing, which I feel like people don't like to hear, is that it is timing, and that's not usually the case for other things. But it is very, very important in publishing to get the right moment, the right time, the right editor while they're on their desk and not in Portugal.
Yeah, I had a colleague who took 2 years to sell a book, but she knew, and that's again what we were saying earlier about having someone who loves your work. She knew there was a home for it. She knew it was brilliant. She knew it needed to be published, so she just kept plugging away. And 2 years later, she had a book deal. And I also think there's the other thing about that is that there can be a huge amount of time between a book deal in one territory and book deal with another. I had a book earlier this year, which, to be fair, it took me nearly 2 months to sell the book, but it went to quite a big auction and it was really exciting, and that's something I'd like you guys to know as well. As agents, we try not to let go of world rights. So publishers always want all the rights and we're always trying to hold them back. So I would not let this one publishing house have North American rights because I sell directly into the States. I was like, we can do this. I have fabulous colleagues in the US. They really know the market. And I think it would have been quite a, like, even bigger chunk of money for my author. And I was like, look, I promise you, it's best for us to do it this way. And he was really kind enough to trust me. And then the North American rights didn't sell. And what I think I'd like you guys to know is that I haven't really spoken, I kept him updated, we would keep going, and then I said, look, we're just going to wait until your structural edits are done with your editor in the UK, and then I'm going to find your home. And I've been working since then, behind the scenes, to speak to editors, to work out who's going to want it. The editor I spoke to the other day, she saw it the first time. It didn't come together for her, but I said, look, I think the edits that we're doing in the UK are really going to fix the issues that you had. And she said, great, I'd love to see it when it's finished. So what agents are quite often doing behind the scenes, we're not talking to you because I don't want to get my author's hopes up. I don't want to tell him that there's a deal on the way if there's not, but I am absolutely every day thinking about this book and working out how I'm going to find the US home for that book. And I think there can be a lot of time between, one deal and then another. So we're always going behind the scenes and we're always pitching. Always, always, always.
Yeah, I think that's kind of what I'd love to have your kind of takeaway from this, is that silence isn't a bad thing, and it can be really uncomfortable to sit in that, but that is so much of a writer's job. It's so much of an agent's job, but so much more something that you will experience, and being able to understand, I think, why that is the case, what people might be doing, I found helps me to kind of sit in that uncertainty better. And if you can do that, it means you can have a better relationship with your agent. It also means you can have a better relationship with your work. And ultimately, this is just part of the industry. And by getting to grips on that, hopefully then you can work on your next manuscript or a next project, and you're not losing that precious time. And also, we understand, it can play on your mind, and it can affect your mental health, and it's definitely something I've been speaking to my authors about more and more. But it's something that's actually a very normal part of the process, and I hope that this has allowed you to kind of understand a bit more about that. And when you are in that situation, you know the questions that you can ask the agent to kind of calm your nerves.
Maybe I sort of just adding as well a bit to the length of time it can take on a publisher side. Even in the best of cases, when an editor wants to make an offer, it can sometimes be, they have to go to their sales team, and sometimes their MD needs to sign off. And so, even if everything's going really well, there can still be these delays for quite good reasons. So it's not just as though they double book and go, bang, here's my offer.
And this is not to say also that you can't ever ask your agent for updates. You absolutely can. It's just if somebody's emailing once a week, being like, what's happening now? Eventually, I'm going, same thing as last week. So something that can be really helpful, and this is something down the line, and I think Carrie Ann said the same thing in the setting boundaries and ideas and how we're going to do it, is you can say, look, I'm really worried about something. When will be a good time for me to check in next, so that you have a deadline, so you don't feel like you're adrift. And then your agent will say, look, there's probably not going to be another update for like 3 months, but if you want to check in January, feel free, and I will even, give you a ring. We can talk through it if you're nervous about anything, and I'll update you in the meantime if there's anything new. But just, I think it's really important, as you're saying, to know that we are working behind the scenes, and that silence doesn't mean that we're ignoring you or that we've forgotten about you.
Thank you. We have about 15 minutes left, and I've still got some questions, but I really wanted to take this opportunity to allow you to ask some questions that you might have of our panelists. So if you do, I will... Oh, lots
went up really fast at the back there.
Can you describe what row?
That
in the middle, the
waving in the middle-ish. There we go. You were first, so I figure.
Good spot.
Hi. I've been submitting to agents for about 6 years now, and receiving a mixture of rejection and nothing, but I'm forging on. My question is, do you copy and paste your rejection messages, or should I pay attention to the words?
Oh, that's a big one. I think one thing, sorry, I hope it's all right that I've just jumped in here. One thing that I didn't say earlier that I wish authors knew is that reading queries is technically not part of our job. We do it out of hours. We do it when we have a moment. We do it when we're not actually providing the services that we provide to our clients. And I get 10 to 15 queries a day. So I've had to close my query inbox because I currently have 1,500 or 1,600 queries that I've got to get through, and all of them need proper attention because the people who submit to me have worked really hard, so I know I've got to take that time to review and make sure. And then I also, very guiltily, I'm going to admit to you all, some of those queries are from March. So it takes a while sometimes, everything gets busy. I do have a form rejection, actually. I don't tend to give feedback because I think it's not helpful. If I don't love your work, then why do you want my opinion? Occasionally, very occasionally, if I think something was really brilliant but it's not quite for me and there was something that was really stopping it, I will say, look, if you want some advice, here's my professional opinion. I think most people have a form rejection. Sometimes you will have been seeing sort of general platitudes, which I know can be difficult. But the other thing that I would say about that is that having a form rejection so I can just click and send a button means that I don't spend a lot of time personalizing advice for someone who might not even want my advice, and instead I can divert the energy and the time that I don't really have to reading more queries and giving them my full attention. So I think if you've got something really personalized from an agent, probably yes, they will have done that, but most of the time I think you do see form rejections, and I know that can be tough, but it's the best we can do.
Thank you. And any other questions? The gentleman up front.
Hi, I know science fiction and fantasy usually get looped together, but are there like particular geographical areas where one is more popular or easier to publish? For instance, I think I've just seen online that science fiction is easier to publish in the United States, whereas fantasy is sort of equal in the UK and the US. And what's your take on that?
Me again, okay. I do a lot of fantasy. I really almost don't do any science fiction, so I am not an expert here. I think that it might be right, but I think as an author, first of all, like we were saying earlier about trends, things come and they go. I wouldn't worry too much about where's best to sell something. And secondly, if you're a science fiction writer, for example, you just got to find an agent who really loves science fiction. Yeah. I do know, I have colleagues who really love that. And I think for you, that's your job, is to just find, because it's almost always just about finding one person. For us, it's finding the editors. For you, it's finding the agents. I think don't worry about territories. Yeah. Just worry about the agent who has a list that is going to fit with what you're writing.
Great, thank you. The lady in the pink, yes, oh gosh, sorry, there, the woman who's standing up, thank you.
Thank you. So in particular, as debut author, what should we be expecting in terms of exclusivity? Should it be exclusivity just for that book or for all your work, all audiovisual material? And also, I mean, because to me this feels like the point where we're most vulnerable. Yes, the agent is our cheerleader, but then what if things go wrong? How do we handle that?
Good question.
Okay. So the person who's asking the question is referring to agency agreements, which is the contract between the agency, and the author. And these will have a set of terms that are industry-wide, and that will be outlining the literary agent as the sole representative of the literary works. Some agencies' agreements will have it only for that one project that author is writing. Other times it's, all their novels as long as the contract is in place. And there are exclusions. Sometimes authors don't want their journalism, what else did they do? What else?
Speaking
engagements, appearances panels. Those things can be excluded. Sometimes, this comes up in my contracts a lot. My argument is that if one of those extra opportunities arises from an IP of the book and which we've negotiated, we would usually be compensated for commission. The other terms you would find are payment, how quickly we'll pay you, and accounting, all of that. The most important part is the stipulations about agency commission. So this should be the same absolutely everywhere. Agents should not be charging you for representation, first and foremost. So if there's anything like that in the contract, do not sign it. Run away, report them. The main commission, the way agents make money from their authors is when they are offered an advance. So the domestic Tory, so if it's the UK, you're selling in the UK territory, it's usually 15%. It's not usually, it is 15%, and that will be across all agencies. For film, translation, stage, it's 20%, and that's include foreign rights. And there should also be terms for the termination. So that will differ agency to agency. There's sometimes a notice period. Other times there isn't a notice. Those notice periods can differ. And there are some other things, but my advice for anyone who's based in the UK and who would be querying agents is to, or has an offer of rep and is reviewing agency agreements, is to contact the Society of Authors, who is an organisation to protect and support writers in the UK. It is a membership, and you can sign up from when you have an offer for an agent, and they will read through your contract for you, make sure that everything's okay. When it does come to agents and authors parting ways, it can be for various reasons. Sometimes the author wants to move on. Sometimes the author is doing a book where that agent does not specialize, does not take on, even though that's not what the book they started doing. And another term is that agency will be entitled to the commission for any project they negotiated at that agency, even if the author then moves on to another agency.
But they will not be entitled to commission for future projects. Sorry, I just thought
specify
that.
Yep. That's pretty much it for an agreement.
I would really recommend that you take it to the Society of Authors. Please be wary of just friends who are lawyers. There's things in their, language that that's very specific to book publishing, and sometimes you can end up getting caught in certain language that actually it's a waste of time, really. So there's a resource out there, and please do make use of them.
I'd also say check. It can be quite useful. Not every agency is signed up to the AAA, the Association of Authors Agents, but almost all reputable agencies are.
Yes.
So that's an easy way to know if you are working with someone who really abides by the industry code of conduct.
The person there with the head wrap on.
Hi there, thanks for this. This is a specific question to Clara. You said you're close to submissions. Do you have an estimate as to when you might open for submission?
Oh, I really was hoping to be open in October, and now it's basically November, and I've still got, I think I got my queries down from like 1,600 to 1,300, and I don't really want to reopen until I've answered everyone, because I know how much it sucks to be waiting months and months and months to hear from someone, and the longer if I open soon, then I'm just making more people wait longer. I'm hoping to be open in January, but we will see.
Thank you.
Thank you. There's a person with a blazer and glasses standing there and waving their hand now. Thank you.
That was the man in the front as well.
Oh, sorry.
Hi, yeah, so I just had a question about personalisation in letters to you guys, because it always feels a bit creepy from our end to be like looking you up on the internet and like, I saw that you like this, or you like this, so I just wondered how much you like personalisation, or if it's something that you think that there's like advice you could give for that.
It varies. I personally don't care. As long as you have my name right, that's all I care about. I hope that there's a reason you chose to submit to me, that something in my bio or the authors I represent spoke to you. And then as long as your synopsis and your actual material is up to the standard to which to query with, that's completely fine. I will read it. But I think it does vary agent to agent. So I'll let you all answer that.
Yeah, I'm sure there are agents who would not be offended, but sort of would not take kindly to if it's very obvious that you've just copied and pasted. And obviously, there's an understanding that there are parts of these pitches which there's only so many ways you can say something. But if it's very obvious that you've just copied and pasted the name in, possibly some agents wouldn't take it as kindly.
I think it's the point where I'm like, oh, is where you've copied and pasted something that you personalised for someone else and then sent it to me, and those things don't apply. Even then, I'll probably look over it, because like you've heard from us, we're reading so many submissions. I do understand you're querying lots of agents, so I'm not going to be like, you didn't know that I love this book and it's the best book in the world, how dare you submit to me? So I would not worry too much about that, but obviously do your research in terms of why you're submitting to that.
I like half a sentence, to be honest. I don't want a whole paragraph. I'm like, I don't need you to write an essay about me. But, when I get a query and it says, references something in my bio that I'm looking for this specifically, and it literally can be half a sentence, or, I always put luster in my bio. So if somebody's like, actually, I think this is a really good comp on it, then that works. And as I was saying earlier, not only copying and pasting something that's for another agent, but also when you get something that's like, I want to query you because of your great reputation in the industry. I'm like, that could have gone to anyone. So I think personalizing enough that it shows that you know who you're sending to is really great, but don't worry too much. Okay, I don't know if you...
Yeah, I agree. I think what always piques my interest is I have a manuscript wish list, and it's very long and very specific. But I do get submissions referring to all the things some of the things I've did, just one thing. And that always means a lot to me, because it's always something that's like the 5th paragraph, like they really read. So yeah, just that acknowledgement that part of the pitch letter, what I'm looking for in the pitch is, why have you queried me? Have you done your due diligence? Do I accept the work that you have written? Would we actually be a good fit? Are there authors on my list that you've referenced that you think you would be, in good similar space with? That's all you need. But yeah, it's very obvious when there's something that's been copy and pasted to sound like it's tailored, but it's obviously quite generic. And that does put you off. Just not even the content, I think, just because you can see all the workings out, and that just doesn't put faith in me that you can tell a story very convincingly.
But I think hopefully it should be a relatively sort of simple thing to do, just because when you're picking an agent to send your work to, I think you should always be able to ask yourself or answer to yourself the question of, why have I picked this agent, as opposed to other agents or the agency.
And I often think you don't really want to be sending to more than, if you send queries out in batches, you don't really be wanting to send to more than 6 people at once. So it's not that many people to get to know. And even if you haven't heard back from someone and it's on a rolling thing, and you might have something out to 10 people at once or 12 people at once, every time. Oh, the other thing is just general advice. When you're submitting, do not, under any circumstances, send your first query to your top pick agent, because something will go wrong the first time you send your query. And if it's your favorite agent, then you've not given yourself a chance to make corrections.
Okay, well, thank you so much. I think we're out of time now, but thank you so much for being such a generous audience, and thank you to our agents.